and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. And today our guest is Dr. Brittney Cooper, very much a light in the sphere of public discourse on race and gender and intersectionality and everything. She is the author of Feminist AF. We'll explain what that means if you don't already know. A guide to crushing girlhood. Eloquent Rage, a Black feminist discovers her superpower. And Beyond Respectability, the intellectual thought of race women. And she's also the editor of the Crunk Feminist Collection. She's also a full tenured professor at Rutgers University. I don't know, Brittney, thanks so much for being with us. There cannot be any more credentials. You know, you're a super credentialed person.
Thank you, Carol.
And thanks so much for being with us today. I want to start by getting your reading, and I know that you're on sabbatical this year working on, you know, a new book and a book for small girls and all. But I want to get your assessment of where we are in the world and race and gender. We're just screaming about the filibuster and what's happening with voting rights. How do you evaluate our situation in the country?
You know, by nature, I'm an optimist. I try to, do as Mariama Cobb says and practice hope as a discipline. I think that honors the legacies of Black people in this country who have certainly faced far worse challenges than the challenges we face today. And things feel really gargantuan and seismic. And on most days I look at this and I say, I don't know how we get out of this mess that we're in. So I think that we are in very dangerous and dire straits, to be quite honest. To me, I've been saying, and I don't say it lightly, it feels like war is in the air, and I'm not excited about that. I think that rhetorical violence always precedes physical and actual violence. And I think that on any given day, what it means to be in the public sphere is that we are rhetorically assaulting each other with different opinions. We can't seem to come to an agreed upon set of facts from which our movements are then, sort of follow. And I think that's a really dangerous place to be. You have a majority of white voters and participants in the electorate who are working from a grievance politics that's really rooted in a kind of fear about the world changing, about US demographics shifting, and about a kind of false narrative that something is being taken away from them, rather than this notion that they are being invited, like all of us are being invited, to change. And then you have, Black communities, people of color communities that are really at the mercy of this kind of unrelenting power structure and a refusal to tell the truth about it. And so figuring out how to cut through the cloud of that and to get some level of clarity, how to get people to move with some sense of integrity and peace and good faith. All of those things feel really impossible right now. I think the only thing that keeps me in the fight is that I don't think the alternative is tenable, which is to just give up and give in to the forces that would take this entire ship down.
Right. What I sometimes say is that we used to talk about the two Americas as the rich and the poor, that was how it broke out. But now we have two Americas who do not have anything in common in terms of understanding what the truth is. So, yeah. I mean, that I think when you use the word impossibility, it seems to me bleak.
And I frankly think that we don't spend enough time recognizing that that is the problem. So what you have is sort of like folks on the left, progressive, liberal-minded people who still believe that if we can just reason with the other side, that we can right the ship. But the other side is in a completely different media ecosystem where there are caravans of immigrants at the border and COVID is not real and is overblown, and January 6th was a peaceful protest and Biden is not the legitimate president. And these are people who seem otherwise reasonable and functional in their daily lives. I think that the challenge that we face is how, in a country that so deeply values freedom of speech, do we actually begin to talk about the problem of misinformation and disinformation? And to me, And perhaps to me, that is the biggest problem because, I have a career as a professional nerd. And so we always think that ideas and words and discourse can solve problems, right? And so what happens when you arrive at a place where that is not the case? And that's why I say I feel like war is in the air, because at the point that folks cannot come to the table and reason together, at the same moment that you have, every time we have a Democratic president, you see an explosion of gun sales. That's been true since the Obama era. So you have also this same group who does not agree about the facts that most of us on the left agree on at some base level, who are also heavily armed, engaging in acts of vigilantism and aggression. And so I think we're facing down really massive threats of violence internally. And I'm not sure how to remain hopeful about that, because while I don't think that the US Democratic project has particularly been a good friend to Black people, I do think that everything that is good about it is good because of the integrity that we have invested in the system. And to see our best efforts being sort of waylaid in a campaign of disinformation is really hard to take.
So I agree with you totally. We are living in an armed society, which elevates the danger element of it all.
Yeah.
And I perceive it still as the remnants of patriarchy that we have never been able to undo or to even diminish. It seems to me that patriarchy is on the rise. And, your thoughts on that? I mean, it's just incredible that you have people who are sitting in Congress who are talking about women who are taking away their power and their rights. It's an extraordinary display of, this weakness in manhood that seems to be at work, in addition to just plain cruelty and obscenity.
Yeah, no, this is also one of the big failures, I think, in the way we made sense of the Trump presidency. We made it about white racial grievance, and so much of it was also about reclaiming a particular kind of masculinity in the quote unquote "Make America Great Again" era. So it wasn't just about saying, oh, we think white people should be on top, but it's really about saying men should be on top. And so even the kind of militarism and sort of muscularity of the way that he governed is all about a kind of masculine performance, right? And one of the ways that I knew that patriarchy was trying to rise again in a different way is we even saw in Black communities a historic number of Black men support Trump in 2020 after we had lived through 4 years of the Trump presidency. And, and it really made many Black communities angry when Black feminist scholars would point this out, because they said, well, there's still a minimal number of Black voters. The vast majority of Black men who are voting don't support Trump. And I said, yeah, but you're seeing a significant rise in the percentages. What could they possibly want from this man who has great disdain for anybody, any person of color? But what they liked was the kind of masculine performance, the sort of bombast, the sense that you could be, quite frankly, a not too bright person, but have a beautiful woman on your arm, or putatively beautiful, and still run the world. And I was like, we know men like this in our communities who want to run everything and who are wholly incompetent, right? Every woman I know that works in an office context or professional setting knows a man of some racial background who is set up to lead, thinks he is entitled to lead, and he doesn't know anything, and he makes everybody miserable because of it. And that was what 4 years of the last president was like. And then when you watched the kind of men that supported him, I was like, oh, we have little T Trumps all over our communities who are very invested in this notion of the patriot.
I know. So we're baffled by the men of color who are supporting Trump, by the white women who should, of all groups, be distancing themselves, and their numbers are increasing. So it's an extraordinary, but for me and the work that you do, it is that intersectionality of race and gender, that fuels so much of this incredible place where we find ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's, look, and one of the things that I also try to think about, I mean, the most glaring evidence of where we are in terms of the patriarchy is that most likely at some point in 2022, Roe v. Wade will be a thing of the past. And that is completely unfathomable. I am 41, which is to say that in my lifetime, Roe v. Wade has been a fact. I could not have imagined a world in which it would not exist in any form, and where you're going to have sort of a white woman as part of the Supreme Court super conservative supermajority who's going to preside over the dismantling of this in a way that is going to harm communities of color. And so many people keep on making this about, a morality play or a debate over when life begins. And I'm like, but this is not about that. This is all about men wanting to assert their power over absolutely every aspect of American life, including reproduction. And that for, and in more colloquial terms, I have just said that I feel like we're living in an era where many white men, not all, but many white men in particular, are having the fantasy that they might be able to experience the world as their grandfathers and great grandfathers experienced it, which is to say, a total experience of white male dominance. They are on the brink of being able to re-secure that through political power, which gives it the air of legitimacy. And how can you compete with that? It disheartens me because for whatever reason, growing up in the 90s in the era of Bill Clinton's national conversation on race and, living through some of the benefits of integrated schools and all of that, I didn't imagine that my classmates still had the fantasy of wanting to live in that way. And so to arrive at near middle age, coming to understand that that fantasy is more seductive than the brief moments of multiracialism and multiculturalism that we experienced over the last few decades is, it's enough to break your heart.
I know. It is exactly that. Heartbreaking. Speaking of heartbreaking, I want to talk a little bit about Black girls, because to me, this is, as I often say, everybody knows about the talk that Black boys get, but people really don't pay attention to the talk that Black girls get, which is essentially, what, sweetheart, the world does not love you. So talk a little bit about the work that I know that you're doing, to understand, grandmothers, mothers, just generations of Black women who have to have this talk with their girls to prepare them from assaults, quite frankly, on every single level.
Yeah, the thing that really galvanized, so I've been teaching courses in Black girl studies for a decade now. The thing that really galvanized me politically around Black girls was in the Obama era when President Obama came out with the My Brother's Keeper program and really told us that he was not going to do anything for the girls because it was the boys who really were having a problem. I was outraged by that, along with lots of Black feminist thinkers and activists. And so it really,
I was pretty outraged. Brittney, I was pretty outraged myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, and so this is, the moment when, we started to say, we've got to shift the conversation. And so a lot of work has happened in the nearly decade since that occurred around, creating philanthropic portfolios for Black girls, thinking about the problem of the school to prison pipeline with Black girls, really having a conversation about Black girls and depression. There was a really important piece from Treva Lindsay this week about Black girls and suicide. So one of the things that the research tells us is that Black girls are over-indexed for actually struggling with depression and suicidal ideation. But the challenge is that nobody ever asks them how they feel. So they're going through it, but we don't know it. And one of the things my co-members of the Crunk Feminist Collective and I put out this book called Feminist AF for young adults, for teen girls this year in late 2021. And one of the things that we talked about as we were touring the book is sometimes, the thing about Black girls is they can often be killing it at school, getting straight A's, doing really well, but breaking apart inside. And so we use achievement, even for grown Black women, we certainly do this, right? But we started early with Black girls, telling them they have to be resilient. And then we wonder why Black women show up at, 35 and 40 talking about, I'm a strong Black woman, because you've had to be strong at age 8, when you're, at age 9 and 12, when you're being sexually harassed, when you're doing more chores at home, when you're having to take up the slack of childcare because we live in a society that does not provide affordable childcare. It's not just Black women in the family who are taking up that societal slack. Girls also get the runoff and the residual. And we haven't figured out structurally how to talk about that because it seems on the surface like Black girls are doing just fine.
Speaking of grown Black women, I want to talk about a few of them. We just
Yeah.
lost Lani Guinier, which to me raised up not only the, I mean, because we have a familiar history with Alzheimer's, the sadness and, you know, in that, but also to be reminded of how she was treated, you know, as a brilliant, prescient Black woman, academic, you know, lawyer,
Yeah.
really treated badly, you know, and so that really, that when I heard that in so many ways, I felt so saddened by that,
Yeah.
you know, and academia is, you know, also, you know, a mess.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the last few weeks, we lost Bell Hooks and we lost Lani Guinier. And these women were really anchor points for a whole couple of generations of us about how to do the work of fighting for race and gender justice. And one of the things that's been really hard, you know, I grew up, you know, came of age in the 90s, so in the Clinton era. And, you know, there is still this kind of reverence in Black communities for Bill Clinton. I mean, it's receding in younger generations, but certainly my mother's generation. And I think about the Black women who were casualties of the Bill Clinton era, and Lani Guinier, is basically the target of a disinformation campaign that says that she believes in quote unquote racial quotas, and her public life became a casualty of these internecine debates about affirmative action. And so the fact that she was brilliant and supremely qualified to do the work that she was doing, and that, you know, it's like if we look back at the 90s, one of the lessons we will learn is how much farther we would have been if we had simply listened to Black women, if we had listened to Anita Hill, if we had listened to Joycelyn Elders, if we had listened to Lani Guinier, all of these women that become casualties, not just of politics on the right, but also politics on the left. And then in the middle of all of that, you have Bell Hooks putting out tome after tome, giving us the language to think about it. And then we sort of have to go into 2022, a year that is going to be pivotal in so many ways. And those women are gone, and in many ways gone, I would argue, before their time. And so I think that what I try to think about in my work, and one of the reasons I'm so committed to like collaborative work and working with my girls and trying to have a sustainable approach to this, is because, you know, it's Black feminist orthodoxy that this work will kill you, that that folks stress Black women out, don't listen to us, gaslight us, tell us that we don't know what we're talking about. And then after we're dead and gone, everybody says, you know what, they were right. But that didn't help you now, you know.
Exactly. And what do you think about the treatment that Vice President Harris is going? This continuation of this disinformation and diminishment of Black women?
I think that Vice President Harris had the toughest job of anybody in America coming in. So she has to represent for the hopes and dreams of Black folks, of Black women. She's got to be she's treated as the chief diversity officer of the nation and of the Biden administration. But she's a brilliant legislator, litigator in her own right, with her own aspirations, and trying to balance that by being the number two to a man who is, you know, certainly a better option than some of the options we had, but who is also incredibly ego driven and whose own track record around his treatment of women is not especially great. So I think that she had the toughest job ever. And then I think on top of that, that now she's sort of in this administration that, you know, where the reporting is about how her own team is in disarray. And, you know, and this is what we always say about powerful women. We say that they're challenging. We say that they're the B word. We say that they are hard to work with, that they're difficult. And if you think about any powerful woman, this becomes the thing that is whispered about her on Capitol Hill. So, you know, Kamala Harris becomes a casualty of that. And look, one of my issues with the Biden administration is I don't think at this juncture that they're setting her up for success. which is interesting to me only because the excitement around the Biden presidency is all about Kamala Harris and all about the way she represents the future of the party and the possibility that we're forward looking and not backward looking. And so the fact that she has not been given a more prominent role because Biden needs to be seen as a competent leader in his own right is, I think, a serious miscalculation. And I think it's deeply unfair to her.
Right. Well, let's hope she can make her way through this. I don't know. It's only 1 year. It feels like 10 already.
It does.
Every single day. I want to talk a little bit about your book, Beyond Respectability, where you talk about the intellectual lives of Black activist women, Fannie Berry Williams, Mary Church Terrell, and especially Pauli Murray, because there's a documentary that you commented on and you've written about her life. And such an extraordinary, talk about before your time in every single way. Pauli Murray was before her time.
That's right. Yeah, that book is my love letter to, to the Black women whose legacy I hope that I get to be a part of in terms of their intellectual and political work. And Pauli Murray is right at the center. And so, there is no major intellectual or political movement of the 20th century that Pauli Murray is not a part of. Pauli Murray was part of the first March on Washington movement in the 1940s, long before we had an actual march in the 1960s. Pauli was taking over buses, sitting down on segregated buses in the 1940s. Pauli created the strategy behind the Brown versus Board of Education decision, but wasn't a part of the legal team that actually fought for it. Pauli was, a pioneering feminist scholar and thinker who was asking us to think about the position of Black women in the law, even before the term intersectionality existed. And so I learned about Pauli, as a graduate student and said, who is this? And part of the reason I felt that way is because I was like, I went to Howard. I'm a Howard University alum. And I never learned about Pauli Murray at Howard, which is completely absurd. Pauli graduated from Howard Law, was the top of her law class. And then the other wonderful part of being able to write about Pauli's life is also to think about queer and trans and non-binary folks and their long legacy of participating in and spearheading civil rights in this country. And so Pauli, today, I think would probably identify as a trans or non-binary person, but also was before Pauli's time in terms of even those terms and frameworks. And so ultimately said, look, I am, a Black woman, though ambivalent about it, in a world that is not kind to Black women. But I hope that Pauli is able to look from the heavens and see that maybe we're doing a little bit better on gender possibility for Black people these days.
Right. I'm a big fan, have been for many, many years, and just so thrilled that she's finally getting, some of what she deserved for her contributions. I want to talk a little bit about the rage of Black women, that you have, you say that Beyonce, Serena Williams, so many of the Black women, that it is their, our rage that propels us to that success level. So let's, talk about that. I mean, we're often described, you talk about the B word, if I had talking about a quarter, right, where a Black woman is going to be on a quarter. If I had a quarter with a Black woman on it, for every time somebody called a Black woman the B word, I'd be rich. So
that's right.
What's this about rage and its driving force?
Yeah. So many Black women have had this angry Black woman stereotype weaponized against us. It certainly has been weaponized against me, not just, by my white counterparts, but also by my Black male counterparts. I remember being on a panel many years ago and a Black male panelist just stopping in the middle of the panel and yelling at me, "Why are you so mad?" And I was like, oh, people really do this. It's completely absurd. And so what I wanted to do was to talk about the ways in which Black women are entitled to be angry at the continual disrespect and being overlooked and being devalued and mistreated. And then so often what we have been told as a mode of survival is that we have to you know, to always be reminding people that we're not mad. Maybe we're passionate, maybe we're being thoughtful or pensive. And I said, well, what happens if we're all those things and also mad because of white supremacy and patriarchy and
Yeah, we're those
sexism?
things, so we're also pretty mad. And
Yeah, like, okay, like I actually am mad at the way that this whole this group project that we're all in together is shaking out. Um, and so giving Black women back the sort of right to their anger and their rage, and not in a way that it could be weaponized as evidence of our irrationality, our untrustworthiness, but simply as evidence of our own sense of value and dignity, and our clear sense that we like deserve to be treated with respect. And that's what I think it signals. And I wanted to think about all of the ways that you kind of see that rage. And I've had so many Black women since Eloquent Rage came out to tell me like that the book was so helpful in helping them to own it, but also that what I said is like it becomes a superpower, right? Because we can choose how we use that energy. We can choose to use it in destructive ways, or we can choose to use it in ways that power what we do. And I tell this story about how I learned that because one of my students is the person, a Black girl student I had, was a person who saw me and one day in a moment of candor just said, you know, she said, your lectures are filled with rage, but it's like the most eloquent rage ever. And I immediately got defensive and said, I'm not angry, I'm passionate. And she sort of just looked at me and said, you know, you're angry, right? And all of a sudden I couldn't hide anymore because she'd seen me, but it was such a fleeting moment, you know?
Well, and a fantastic moment because you've articulated that, you know, that undergirding sense of, and I love, yes, we're angry and we have reason to be angry, but we're also many other things.
Yeah.
Brittney Cooper, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you will come back. You know, I love everything you write, everything you say. Your take on everything gives all of us a participation, you know, in the discourse, you know, that often we're not included in. So thank you for that. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and we'll see you the next time.